It was a quiet evening in the small town of Maplewood, where time seemed to slow down as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills. The air carried the scent of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery, and children's laughter echoed from the playground. But inside a modest house on Willow Street, the world of one man was about to change forever. Ethan Carter sat at his wooden desk, running his fingers through his graying hair. His weary eyes rested on a small, antique box, the last remaining piece of his late mother's legacy. Inside, a single object rested, a gold locket, encrusted with tiny gemstones, its delicate chain slightly worn from years of being passed down through generations. This locket was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of love, of family, of the past that still clung to Ethan like an old ghost. It had once belonged to his mother, Eleanor Carter, a woman whose faith had been unshakable even in the darkest times. Before she passed, she had held Ethan's hands and whispered, "This locket is meant to find its way where it truly belongs." He never truly understood what she meant. Tonight, as he prepared to tuck the locket away safely, his heart grew heavy with the weight of memory. He sighed, placed the box inside the top drawer of his desk, and locked it securely. Yet, as he turned away, a strange sensation pricked at the back of his mind, a whisper of unease. He hesitated for a moment, but shook it off, convincing himself it was just his emotions playing tricks on him. Little did he know, this would be the last time he ever saw the locket. The next morning, golden sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the room in warm hues. Ethan yawned, stretched, and walked over to his desk, intent on retrieving the locket before heading out for the day. He reached for the key, unlocked the drawer, and pulled it open. His breath hitched. The antique box was gone. His fingers fumbled through the drawer, shuffling through papers, pens, and random trinkets. His heart pounded in his chest. He checked the floor, the shelves, even the wastebasket. Nothing. He ran a shaky hand over his face. No, no, no. It has to be here. He tore through his house like a madman, searching every possible hiding spot, overturning cushions, rifling through cabinets, and even checking the attic. But the locket had simply vanished. Ethan collapsed onto the couch, his mind racing. Had someone broken in? No, the locks were intact, and nothing else was missing. Could he have misplaced it? Impossible. He remembered locking it away himself. Then where? Where had it gone? Dread settled in his bones. God wouldn't let me lose this. Would he? Days turned into weeks, and the locket remained missing. The loss gnawed at him, keeping him up at night. He blamed himself for being careless, for not cherishing the one thing his mother had left him. He started avoiding the places that reminded him of her, the church she used to visit, the garden where she once sat humming old hymns. His faith, once strong and unwavering, now felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. One stormy evening, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, staring at his reflection in the window. Rain streaked down the glass like tears. "Why, God?" he whispered into the emptiness. "Why would you take it from me?" No answer came, only silence. But far away, in a place he never would have expected, the locket was exactly where it was meant to be. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond his understanding had happened to the locket. Days had passed, then weeks, and still, no sign of it. He had searched every possible place, retraced his steps, and even considered the impossible, that perhaps he had simply imagined putting it in the drawer at all. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The locket had been there, and now, it was gone. One evening, as he sat at the local diner, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of black coffee, his best friend Daniel slid into the booth across from him. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Daniel said, eyeing him with concern. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I lost something. Something important. And I can't figure out how." Daniel leaned forward. "You're still thinking about the locket, aren't you?" Ethan nodded. "It's not just a piece of jewelry, Dan. It was my mother's. It was all I had left of her." Daniel studied him for a moment, then said, "Maybe you didn't lose it. Maybe it was taken for a reason." Ethan scoffed. "You sound like my mother now. She always believed things didn't just happen by chance." Maybe she was right, Daniel said, taking a sip of his coffee. Ever consider that God moved it where it's needed? Ethan frowned. Needed? Where else would it be needed except with me? Daniel shrugged. I don't know, man. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the things we think are meant for us aren't. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't believe in coincidences, but he also wasn't ready to believe that something so precious could just disappear because of some divine plan. But little did he know, miles away, in a part of town he had never stepped foot in, the locket had already found its way into someone else's hands. Somewhere across town, a young woman named Olivia pressed her back against the brick wall of an abandoned building, shielding herself from the cold. Her hands trembled as she pulled her thin coat tighter around her body, but it did little to fight off the night's bitter wind. She was alone. Again. Life had not been kind to Olivia. At only 24, she had lost more than most people did in a lifetime. She had grown up in the foster system, never knowing the warmth of a real home. When she finally aged out, the world had met her with nothing but closed doors and disappointment. She had tried. She really had. But when life kept knocking her down, she had stopped fighting back. Now, she drifted through the city, sleeping wherever she could, hoping that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be better. Tonight, as she wandered near the old train station, she noticed something unusual near a bus stop. Half buried in the damp leaves, something glinted under the streetlight. Curious, she bent down and picked it up. A locket. It was old, delicate, with intricate goldwork and tiny gemstones embedded along its surface. Olivia's fingers brushed against the cool metal, and for some reason, a chill ran through her. There was something about it. Something familiar, though she couldn't explain why. Her heart pounded as she carefully unlatched it. Inside, there was a tiny photograph, aged and slightly faded, but she could make out the face of a kind-looking woman, smiling softly. Something about the woman's eyes. They felt warm, comforting. Beneath the photo, an engraving caught Olivia's attention. She squinted in the dim light to make out the words. This locket is meant to find its way where it truly belongs. A shiver ran down her spine. She had no idea why, but suddenly, she felt like this locket wasn't just something she had found. It was something that had been given to her. But why? And by whom? Back at home, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep escaping him once again. Somewhere out there, the locket was gone. But soon, he would realize it wasn't truly lost. It had simply been moved. Olivia sat on the cold pavement, staring at the locket in her palm. The weight of it felt heavier than it should, almost as if it carried something unseen, something more than just metal and gemstones. She traced the engraving with her fingertip. This locket is meant to find its way where it truly belongs. She had no memory of ever seeing this locket before, yet something about it sent a shiver through her. A strange warmth settled in her chest, like a whisper from the past, calling to her. But why? Olivia closed the locket gently and slipped it into the pocket of her coat. She didn't know why she felt so drawn to it, but she couldn't leave it behind. Somehow, she knew, this locket had come to her for a reason. The next morning, Olivia made her way to a small shelter downtown, where she often went for a warm meal. The place was bustling with people, some offering food, others simply looking for company. As she sat in a corner, eating a bowl of soup, an older woman named Margaret approached her. Margaret had been volunteering at the shelter for years, always offering a kind word to those who needed it. "Morning, sweetheart," she greeted, sitting across from Olivia. "You okay today?" Olivia hesitated, then reached into her pocket, pulling out the locket. She held it up. I found this last night." Margaret leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Oh my, that's beautiful. Where did you find it?" "Near the train station," Olivia replied. "It was just lying there. But, I don't know. Something about it feels strange. Like it's important." Margaret studied the locket for a moment, then asked, "May I?" Olivia handed it to her, watching as Margaret carefully opened it. When she saw the photograph inside, she gasped softly, her eyes widening. "Dear Lord," she murmured. What is it?" Olivia asked, suddenly feeling her pulse quicken. Margaret looked up at her, her expression unreadable. I recognize this woman. Olivia froze. You what? Margaret nodded slowly. I don't know her personally, but I've seen her picture before. A man used to come into this shelter a while back, talking about her. A man. Olivia's throat tightened. Who? Margaret furrowed her brows, trying to recall. His name was Ethan, I think. Ethan Carter. He used to volunteer here sometimes, but I haven't seen him in weeks. Olivia's breath hitched. That name, Ethan, sent an odd chill down her spine. Do you know where I can find him? She asked, gripping the table. Margaret shook her head. I'm not sure, but I know he lives somewhere in Maplewood. He always talked about his mother, Eleanor. Said she was the strongest woman he ever knew. Olivia's heart pounded. Eleanor. She had seen that name before. Somewhere deep in her memories, it lurked in the shadows, waiting to be remembered. I need to find him, Olivia whispered, more to herself than to Margaret. I have to find him. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at his desk. Weeks had passed since the locket had vanished, but the ache in his chest had not faded. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't let it go. He had prayed. He had begged. He had questioned God's reasoning. And yet, no answer had come. Until now. A knock at the door startled him. He hesitated, then stood up, making his way to the entrance. When he opened it, he froze. A young woman stood on his porch, clutching something in her hands. Something gold. Something familiar. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. No way. The locket. It was his locket. His eyes snapped up to meet the young woman's. Where did you get that? She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I think this belongs to you. Ethan reached for the locket, his fingers trembling as he took it from her grasp. The moment it touched his skin, an overwhelming sense of peace washed over him, like a missing piece of his soul had finally been returned. But as he looked into the young woman's eyes, something else struck him. A feeling. A familiarity. A recognition he couldn't explain. Who are you? He asked, his voice hoarse. The young woman hesitated, then finally spoke. My name is Olivia, she said. Then, after a deep breath, she added. And I think your mother knew who I was. Ethan's world tilted. He had no idea what she meant. But somehow, deep inside, he knew. This was only the beginning. Ethan stared at Olivia, his mind racing. The locket felt warm in his hands, like it carried a pulse of its own. Like it had been waiting for this moment. You said my mother knew you. His voice was thick with confusion. How? Olivia hesitated. She could see the storm brewing in his eyes, the disbelief, the desperate need for answers. But the truth was, she didn't know either. Not yet. I don't remember, she admitted. But when I saw this locket, something in me just clicked. I knew I had to find you. Ethan studied her, trying to make sense of it all. He had spent weeks grieving the loss of the locket, questioning why it had disappeared. And now, here it was, returned to him by a complete stranger. A stranger who, somehow, was connected to his mother. Ethan stepped aside. Come in. Olivia hesitated, then nodded and stepped into the house. They sat in the living room, the locket resting between them on the coffee table. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. This belonged to my mother, he began. Her name was Eleanor Carter. She always said this locket carried a piece of her soul. Olivia's gaze remained fixed on the delicate gold pendant. She gave it to me before she passed, Ethan continued, his voice quieter now. It was her way of telling me that she'd always be with me. He exhaled. And then one day, it just vanished. Olivia swallowed hard. Maybe it wasn't lost, she said softly. Maybe it was meant to find me. Ethan frowned. But why? What's your connection to my mother? Olivia bit her lip, her hands shaking slightly as she reached into her coat pocket. I don't know, she whispered. But I think this might have something to do with it. She pulled out a folded, time-worn letter. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Where did you get that? I found it at the shelter, Olivia explained. The volunteers keep old belongings that people leave behind. This one caught my eye. She handed it to him. Ethan slowly unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. His mother's. His breath hitched as he began to read. My dearest Olivia, I don't know if you will ever read this. But if you do, I need you to know something. You were never abandoned. You were never unwanted. You were loved. More than you could ever know. Circumstances took you from me, but I have carried you in my heart every single day. If life has led you to this letter, then perhaps God has finally brought you home. With all my love, Eleanor. Ethan's hands trembled as he finished reading. His vision blurred with unshed tears. He lifted his head slowly, staring at Olivia as if seeing her for the first time. Olivia's lips parted. She wrote that to me. Ethan couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. But it was. A sob broke from Olivia's throat as realization struck her. I wasn't just connected to your mother, she whispered. She was my mother, too. Ethan felt the room spin. His mother, his beloved mother, had another child. A child she had lost. A sister he had never known existed. The locket hadn't been stolen. It hadn't been lost. It had been moved, guided, so it could finally lead them back to each other. Ethan clutched the locket tightly, his heart hammering in his chest. All this time, he had thought God had taken something away from him. But in truth, God had returned something he never knew he needed. His family. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as the weight of the revelation crashed down on her. She had spent most of her life believing she was alone, drifting, unwanted, forgotten. But now, in the most unexpected way, she had found a truth she never could have imagined. Eleanor Carter wasn't just a stranger's name. She was her mother. The mother she had spent her childhood wondering about. The mother she had no memories of. The mother she had longed for in the quietest moments of her life. And sitting across from her, staring at her in stunned disbelief, was her brother. Ethan leaned forward, gripping the letter with white-knuckled hands. He looked at Olivia as if searching for something, some resemblance, some proof that this was real. But he already knew. He had felt it from the moment he opened the door. The locket had found its way to Olivia for a reason. His mother had never let her go. She had never forgotten. Ethan took a shaky breath. I don't know what to say. Olivia wiped at her cheeks, trying to steady herself. Neither do I. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken words, unasked questions, and emotions too big to put into sentences. Finally, Ethan reached for the locket. He turned it over in his palm, then held it out toward Olivia. This belongs to you, he said. Olivia hesitated. No, it was your mother's. Ethan shook his head. Our mother. His voice was firm but gentle. She wanted you to have it. She wrote that letter to you. Olivia swallowed past the lump in her throat. With trembling fingers, she took the locket. The moment it settled in her palm, warmth spread through her, like an embrace from someone unseen, yet deeply felt. It was as if Eleanor was whispering from beyond, telling her that she had always been loved, that she had never been forgotten, that she had finally come home. 1 week later, Ethan and Olivia stood side by side in the quiet cemetery, staring at the simple yet elegant gravestone. Eleanor Carter, a loving mother, forever in our hearts. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a strange sense of peace. I wish I could remember her, Olivia murmured, running her fingers over the engraved letters. Ethan slipped an arm around her shoulders. She would have wanted you to remember her this way, he said softly. As someone who never stopped loving you. Never stopped waiting for you. Olivia clutched the locket around her neck, a small smile forming through her tears. Maybe she didn't have memories of Eleanor, but she had something stronger now. The knowledge that, even in loss, God had never truly taken anything away from her. He had simply been waiting for the right moment to return what had always been meant to find her. And now, she was whole again. Ethan and Olivia walked away from the cemetery, side by side. Two souls who had been separated for so long. Two hearts that had always been connected. And now, after years of searching, loss, and silent prayers, they had finally found each other. Because sometimes, what seems lost was never really lost at all. It was simply moved by God. For a reason.